Hey guys, Ben here. I'm going to be making a rambly video that will eventually, hopefully, become an introduction on a system called Open Legend, which is the only thing I have ever thrown money at on Kickstarter. I've heard too many horror stories from other people to really trust it, except for this one. Which begs the question, why did I suddenly have a change of heart and decide to put my money behind it? A few reasons. First off, the game is open license, meaning that subsequent game makers can take this system, build on it, and make their own content, which is pretty cool. Also, the entire game system is completely free to read. The rule set is up on their website, so you can look at it there at openlegendrpg.com. I will put the link in the description of this video, so you can check it out if you're so inclined. The system is something called a generic RPG. The concept is, it's a system that tries to be mythos and setting independent, so you could just as easily use it to run a space opera or fantasy or 80s action movie, or it could be used to run a really off-the-wall RPG concepts that none of the other game systems can cover, like one where you're a bunch of anthropomorphic household appliances going out in search for their master, or if players are reincarnated dragons living out their lives as Englishmen in the 1800s. There's a few other generic systems that I've dealt with that have tried to tackle this, like Fate, GURPS, which stands for Generic Universal Role-Playing System, Savage Worlds, The Strange, Basic Role-Playing, OpenD6, to name a few. You've even got this new Genesis system coming out, which is based on the Fantasy Flight Star Wars game. However, this system has a few interesting things that make it stand out, which we'll get into later. The best way I think to describe Open Legend is, like, if someone looked at D&D and said, yeah, D&D is cool and all, but instead of locking the abilities to various classes and levels, what if instead we turn everything into feats and assign them a point cost which players can just buy at character creation? So, for example, they have a feat called Lethal Strike, which gives bonus damage if the opponent is unaware of them. That sounds kind of familiar. You might even call it a stabby back ability? Maybe? Or there's an ability that allows a character to go into a rage and attack recklessly. This way of setting everything up through feats is an interesting idea and opens up a lot of character concepts. They also apply this for race abilities as well. Instead of saying, I'm playing an elf, so that means I get a bonus to intelligence and I'm ageless, it's more like, I want to play an elf, so I'll put ranks in intelligence and buy the ageless feat at character creation. The combat in Open Legend is done very, uniquely, let's say. Combat tends to be a beast in generic RPGs because, really, how would you make a universal combat system? Most generic RPGs I've seen in other games boil it down to two strategies when it comes to combat. Either they basically throw it out the window by saying you make an attack against a defense and don't really care how it gets done. Or they stat everything in existence with a host of splat books. The system takes a third option where they try and keep the game strategic, but remove a lot of the trappings. Combat in Open Legend revolves around banes and boons. When you make an attack, you can do damage or inflict a bane on the opponent. For example, blindness, knockdown, fear, etc. In addition, there's the other side of that coin with boons, which are benefits, like protecting people, healing wounds, or bolstering allies. The interesting thing about banes and boons is that everyone can use them. You start out with your base stats, agility, might, learning, logic, and so on, and assign points to these stats. Banes and boons have a prerequisite before you can access them, like your agility must be at 3 to use the disarm maneuver, or your might has to be at 1 to use knockdown. But certain banes can actually come from multiple stats, so to use the bane blindness, it could be from agility if you're just flicking dirt in their eyes, or it could be from a paladin who raises up a shield and does a solar flare. You could use your might or presence or influence to demoralize the opponent. Just like banes, boons can come from anywhere as well. Healing could come from intelligence with a smart magic or alchemist, or from a cleric's creation magic. Getting into the magic, in this game spellcasting is much more open-ended than the other ones. You have spheres of extraordinary abilities: alteration, creation, energy, entropy, influence, movement, prescience, and protection. If you want to play a character who uses magic, instead of picking spells, you put ranks into a sphere of extraordinary abilities. And so you can use banes and boons that correspond to how many ranks you put into that sphere. So, if you want to play a vampire who warps the minds of the weak, using banes like Mind Dredge or Domination, you would put ranks into Influence Magic, Sphere, which would give you access to the boons Invisibility, Darkness, and Aura of Fear, while in the feats you could buy Alternate Form as a bat or flying. The system also does rolling a little bit differently. It includes two options called Success with a Twist and Failure, but the story continues. These are two other options if someone doesn't pass a difficulty check. The way it works is that if someone fails a roll, they can still succeed, but at a consequence. For example, if they're trying to run and they fail their athletics checks to do a badass power slide under the portcullis that's rapidly closing, instead of having them get stuck on the other side, the GM could just say that the player slid so hard they went right off the cliff and take some damage on the way down. Then there's the other option, Failure, but the story continues, where a player could get false information when they're making an intelligence roll, or instead of picking a lock, they figure out that the key for the door is hidden somewhere else. This particular system is also used in combat as well. If you miss an attack, you can still opt to do a grazing wound, which does a little bit of damage, inflict a minor bane, or move 10 feet. So it gives something to the characters that miss their attacks and lets them still have, an impact on the fight. Hopefully some of you might be interested. I was just trying to give you guys an overview for how the system works. If you're curious, all the rules are up online, which you can check out. The only issue is that they have not released a bestiary or enemies list or any fluff yet. So if you run it, you're going to have to do a little bit of work making some of the monsters and lore up. Anyway, that's it for me. Hope you have fun. I'll see you guys next time.